Hey everyone, and welcome to the Phileas Club. This is episode 116. We're in October 2018, and we have a long conversation with Tony, our very good conservative friend, and we also talk about France and the crazy things that have been happening there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Phileas Club. This is a show where we talk to people who have different opinions than ours, sometimes, hopefully, and we discuss things in a rational, calm, and constructive manner, or at the very least, we try to listen to what they have to say without screaming either at them or being screamed at by them, and hopefully, by the end of it, we end up having gained something, all of us. Hopefully. My name is Patrick Beja, and today it's a duo show, and I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation because, of course, the United States of America are always at the center of many people's discussions in this day and age. And we have Tony, who is back, holding the flag for, I want to say, reasonable Republicans. I don't know if you conservatives, maybe, if you want to define yourself as reasonable, Tony, you can let us know yourself.
I don't know if I'd go that far, Patrick, but I try.
Well, I mean, the really important thing we want to talk about today is your newfound love for guitar, and how you have two guitars now, right?
I do. I picked it up at the young age of 38 last February. I bought myself a cheap acoustic off of Amazon and really fell in love with guitar. So my wife bought me a nice Gretsch electric guitar a couple months ago, and I've already got other ones on my radar. I understand finally why guitarists have multiple guitars and they're always looking at the next one.
Well, I'm sure, that will help showing that you are indeed a conservative and a human being to all of our liberal, crazy listeners. So we're trying basically to humanize you. You have a wife, you have children. You're not a monster who wants to eat, I don't know, children. No, maybe not. But no, maybe
Definitely
not. No. That's the opposite of what you want. So just a quick note before we start. I'll also talk about things that have been happening in France, and that is, that have been very surprising, and at the same time not that surprising. But there's a major political figure that has essentially destroyed themselves, or not destroyed themselves. That's a bit strong, but damaged themselves very badly in a way that is, I don't really even know how to describe it, but I think it's interesting. So we'll talk about this a little bit later. And I did want to mention the fact that I'm sure a lot of you were looking forward to having us talk about the things happening in connection with Saudi Arabia and maybe hearing what Turkey had to say. But I thought about it a lot, and I didn't want to put him in an awkward situation. I didn't want to have a discussion that would be complicated, and so I elected not to ask him to come on the show. And it's a discussion that I think would have been interesting, but we will have to save for another day. So I'll leave it to that. And yeah, I as I said, I thought about it quite a bit and decided I would not ask him to be on the show. All right. You know what? Last episode, well, not last episode, because last episode was about Switzerland, and it was super interesting, and I urge you to go and listen to it. But the one before, we talked about Judge Kavanaugh and his nomination to the Supreme Court of the U.S., and there were a few mistakes in the description, most notably about the fact that he was the first nominee from President Trump, which he wasn't. He was a second, so that explains a lot of things. And we discussed this in the comments and on Twitter, on many places. But I don't think it changed the core of our discussion with Allison about why liberals were very anti his nomination as it relates to the accusations of rape, and Republicans were supporting him very vehemently as well. And I thought, as you were talking about before we started the show, Tony, you were telling me, well, it's not really in the news anymore. It's kind of done, and now the election is coming up. But I thought it could be interesting to have your, opinion, your voice on this very quickly at the beginning of the show. Because for many people, it's kind of difficult to understand how you would even support the nomination of Kavanaugh. So I'm basically throwing it to you, Tony. How would you describe that situation from your side of the incredibly damaging divide in the U.S. between two sides now? So how would you describe that situation, Tony?
That's a very open-ended question. There's a lot of nuance to the Kavanaugh nomination, and I guess the best way for me to go about it is if we've got a few minutes, is to start at the beginning, because I'll start with the nomination itself. First and foremost, I was more in favor of a different nominee, Amy Coney Barrett. I felt like she was more conservative than Kavanaugh. I think Kavanaugh is definitely a constitutionalist. He's going to rule based upon the Constitution, the way it was written and how it was intended. And that is kind of the crux of what conservatives are looking for from a Supreme Court justice. They want the justice to rule based upon the Constitution, because that's the role of the Supreme Court, to look at the Constitution and see whether the law fits that. So I would have put Kavanaugh probably as my second nominee, and I think so. I'll dive right in to the alleged sexual assault claims at the very beginning, and I'm probably going to go from level-headed Republican to crazy Republican in some people's eyes as I go through this conversation, because at the very beginning, I tended to believe the accusations, or let's be honest with myself now for a moment. I wanted to think that I believed the accusations, and I don't want to say I wanted to believe them like I thought he did it, but I didn't want to discount her claim, because there's no way for me to know whether he did it or whether he didn't do it. But just out of my personal belief system, I didn't want to say, well, she's lying because she's going against my guy. I try not to do that. But as time went on, as more information came out, and of course, take this with the grain of salt that it deserves to be taken with, a lot of the information that a lot of us get these days is from Twitter, and you really have to verify that information, and sometimes it's impossible to verify. But it did seem like news sources were saying they were poking holes in the claim, especially as it got farther and farther in. Some of the claim, well, first of all of the people that she listed as corroborating witnesses couldn't corroborate. And some of the things that she said seemed to have falsities to it. Now, does that mean that her original claim was false? No. But my thought process on, do we punish a person based on a claim that you have no proof, no corroboration, no anything for? That just doesn't seem right to me.
And I think on that line of thought, as much as the common line is, I believe women. And I think that's a very strong and important statement. And it's kind of a super rock and hard place to be when you say, yeah, I believe women, but in this case, it feels like I'm going to make so many people angry. It feels like in the same way that this judge should be held to a impeccable standard, there's one or two women who come out and say these things. If there's very, very little corroborating evidence, I understand the sentiment that, well, do we stop everything when there's the evidence is so light. I don't want to say flimsy, but it is a little bit light. It's essentially she said it, and I don't know. I don't have an answer there. It's kind of yeah.
There really isn't. I mean, if you take one person saying one thing and another person saying another thing, how do you make a decision on that? Do you make a decision based upon their emotional appeal, which is kind of what some people were going off of in their testimonies? That's tough because some people are better communicators than others. I mean, I know people that I could outright straight lie and do a better job of coming across as more truthful because I'm a pretty good communicator. That's just the way it is. But
let me ask you another question. When you're saying some of the things she was saying didn't add up, or there's a lot of things that have been said about this, the people who are surviving these kinds of trauma not remembering details around it because your mind does shut down to try and protect yourself from the trauma, but also remembering very clearly that the actual thing happened. This is, just so I understand, that's not what you're talking about. It's not like the details that she misremembered. Maybe she did, but whether or not she did, it ended up there wasn't any additional corroborating evidence or any evidence that he was... Again, in your view and the way you looked at this, it's not just, well, there are some things she misremembered. It's just that if you take everything about the whole story, there wasn't anything other than her word. Am I correct in understanding this?
That's correct. I'm not poking holes in the fact that she didn't remember. I mean, it is tough so I'm not criticizing her for not remembering all the details about the incident, but at the same time, how do you take an incident that you can't get all the details for? You can't get a place, a time, who was there. How do you corroborate that? And that's what you really have to do. You've got to corroborate these things. Otherwise, what are you going to do with it? But what I was actually referring to when I said about things not adding up, and again, this is where it gets back to, is it true? Is it not true? Where's the proof? Were things like she said that, or it was claimed that this came about because she was speaking with a psychologist or with her husband, or maybe it was a psychiatrist. I get the two confused from time to time. But then it came out that the reason that they said they were speaking to the psychiatrist, like they had happened 2 years or a certain number of years prior. And I don't know if you're familiar with this part of the story or not, Patrick. I can get into it.
No, I'm not. So if you can explain very quickly.
Yeah. So apparently she talked about the experience that she had when she was having counseling with her husband. The reason they were having counseling with her husband was because they were fighting because they were trying to do some sort of remodeling in their home because she wanted an extra door. And this sounds so weird that I even hesitate to bring it up because I can't verify it, but it's something that was going around. Multiple sources were saying this. So, but when they looked back at the records of their home renovation, because they lived in California and they got to get a permit for everything, the home renovation where they put the door in, which would have been the fight, which would have caused the counseling, happened years prior to the counseling. Now that's a bit
weird. That seems a little bit nitpicky, but
it is. But when you start adding these things up, and I don't want to get, well, I will, the flying thing. She didn't want to come because and the flying thing to me honestly gets a little more to the Democrats and not necessarily her. I don't want to pick on her because, especially at the beginning, like I said, I didn't necessarily think that something didn't happen to her. I just didn't know that he was responsible, But as time went by, there were so many things that weren't adding up, like the flying thing. She didn't want to come and testify because she was afraid of flying, but she flew everywhere. She flew for vacation. She flew for work. She flew for family visits. And yes, people said, well, you can still be afraid to fly if you fly. Okay. But wouldn't you consider this an important enough reason to fly, just like a vacation? And things like that. All these things together, when you start building this house, it doesn't seem to have a good foundation.
Right.
But to me, a lot of it, and this is probably where I come across as the crazy Republican conspiracy theorist, but I think we can all agree that the Democrats played this politically. They didn't just put it out there when they got it. They used it as a tool to try to delay, at the very least, delay the vote. Are you on board with that statement?
I would say it doesn't. It's a shame that this has a value of invalidation to the incident, if it does. The fact that it's played politically or not should almost not matter. But I understand that, yes, possibly it was played politically. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm definitely more certain that it was played politically because they had it for months before they said anything.
Well, because she did. I mean, just to address this part of the issue, I can see how she doesn't want to go through the whole circus. It's essentially have her life, if not ruined, possibly ruined, but at least transformed for the rest of her life. She doesn't want to do it until it's certain that the guy has reasonable chances of being nominated, right? You have to agree that this also plays a role into it. No?
So you're saying that her reason for doing it was to stop his nomination, not for her own. And I know that you can't say that, but in that circumstance,
the way I will say it is, I think if she sees that this person that she knows, from her point of view, she knows is a bad person. She sees that, he's rising in the judicial system and it bothers her. But at some point, he's going to become the highest judicial authority in the country. At that point, she's like, I have to do something. I have to say something because at this point, it's too important. I think this is a reasonable way of looking at things, don't you?
Sure, I'll accept that.
Okay.
Yes. But yeah, so again, the last thing I want to do is vilify her because I don't know enough about her. I don't know her experience. I don't know anything to know whether or not something did happen to her. But the hill that I'm going to fight on is you can't ruin somebody's life based off of an accusation that has no corroboration. I'm a believe and verify person, and I am aware that you can't always verify. But if you can't verify, then can you really punish?
Right. I think I understand that sentiment, and I think it's made incredibly complicated by the fact that you have to, and I understand we're two white men talking about this, so yes, I know that is, ironic, but the fact that it's important to believe women is important, and I understand that, and I think it's a key part of the story, but it's not the only part. I tend to agree with you that if after this whole circus, I mean, there was another person who said he shoved his penis in her face. I believe that was another accusation, but ultimately, I think everyone who looks at this objectively will have to agree that doubt remains. And not in the sense that, we never, I think there's no doubt, for example, that Trump had sex with prostitutes. Would you agree with that? Because we know the character, we know the guy. I think it's fairly obvious, it's fairly reasonable to assume that, yes, in that case, he had sex with prostitutes. Does that disqualifying him from being the president? Everyone can make their own decision in that. There are many things that would. But even though it's not proven in the case of Trump, I think it's reasonable to assume, right? In the case of Kavanaugh, I don't think you can make a similarly reasonable decision on whether or not it happened. And I understand where you're coming from. And I don't have a a dog in this fight, really. I'm from France and from Europe, and it won't affect me what he decides. But still, I don't really like his politics and the way he is likely going to rule. But I can't. I see where you're coming from, and where I would go a little bit farther up in time, in further down the path of whatever. And I would say, last time I said, for these kinds of things, we need more than a simple majority. You have to get people in the room and force them to find someone that, 60%, 2/3 of the House or whatever agrees on. But if I'm not mistaken, maybe you know this, if I'm not mistaken, someone told me it's actually the Democrats that changed the rule for this for the last nomination, because it used to be 60% or 2/3 majority, and they changed it to a simple majority. Is that correct? Do you know?
Somewhat. So I'm going to give Democrats a little bit of ammunition here, because there are two sides to this story. The Democrats did drop the supermajority requirement for presidential nominees because Republicans were blocking a lot of the nominees that Barack Obama was trying to put in, because they couldn't get a supermajority. However, if you ask a Democrat, they will say, well, they dropped it for presidential nominees except for the Supreme Court, which, would they have, if they had an opportunity to put a Supreme Court justice in without a supermajority, would they have? You bet they would have, but they didn't have that opportunity. So now they're saying, well, yeah, we made it so it was only a majority for those nominees, but not Supreme Court. And you Republicans are the ones that are making it for the Supreme Court. So,
right.
Yes and no. I think the intent was for them to push through their nominations. Certainly the intent wasn't for Republicans to be able to push through nominations without a supermajority. But I don't think they were looking ahead to the fact that Republicans probably would get that opportunity.
Well, I mean, ultimately, I don't think everyone's going to agree on all of this. But I will say that looking at it from afar, I keep coming back to the statement I made last time, which is, it seems asinine that a simple majority is enough for these nominations that are lifetime nominations. And I understand that the current state of the U.S. political system and landscape means that you would never get anyone nominated. But I would go as far as to say that that's not a reason. Then it would create the constitutional or the government, the judicial crisis that is needed maybe to get things moving. But I'm looking at this from the outside. I think it's so damaging that this opposition is so binary and this is a consequence of that. Ultimately, if they had needed a more than simple majority, he would not have been elected with this scandal behind him. And that's the way I think it should work. But given the fact it's a simple majority.
Yeah, I want to make one clarification on what you just said, sure. Patrick, and that's, you said with the requirement for a supermajority, he would not have been elected or nominated with this scandal behind him. You can take that part of the statement out of it completely. With the requirement of a supermajority, even if he was spotless, there were no accusations, he would not have been nominated, because the left was so afraid, and I think the likelihood of this happening is virtually nil. They're so afraid that he's going to overturn Roe v. Wade. He's not that guy. And in my experience with his rulings, he's not that guy. But that was what I'm not going to say that the accusations had nothing to do with it, but without those accusations, it would have been nearly as bad. They would have found other things, because Gorsuch, he had a lot of opposition to him too, and it was pretty vitriolic. And they didn't get a supermajority for Gorsuch either.
But that's what I mean. And in this, sorry, finish up, Tony.
That's okay. Go ahead. I was just going to ramble.
But I mean, this goes to both parties in this. I really hate the idea that, they're both the same and they both do the same things and the same bad things. I don't think that's the case. And you know that. I think the Republicans are a little bit more ruthless than the Democrats. And I'm sure you think the same about, the Democrats compared to the Republicans. But obviously the Republicans delayed the nominations of the Democratic Party nominee last time, which was outrageous. I really think that was a horrible thing to do. But if you needed a supermajority, I agree with you, they would not be nominated. But I think it's one of the ways to force people to come back to the middle. The problem is everyone is running away to the extremes, and you're getting into this situation where no one can even hear what the other side is saying, because you have these situations where, well, if we have a majority, we take everything. And the majority is composed entirely of one party. And that's the other issue with the two-party system I've been railing about on this show. This is a toxic system. You shouldn't have a two-party system. You need more. You need to learn, as children do, to compromise and to, give a little bit and take a little bit and all of this. And this doesn't happen with these systems in place. So I think beyond the fact that I agree with you, Tony, it wouldn't happen if a super-majority was needed. I think it would be needed so that down the line you would get to a landscape where it still would happen. And I don't know if it would, but I think that's the path. Now, I don't see a path. I don't see how, it's just going to be opposition forever. But
that's a pessimistic view, and I don't disagree. As far as the two-party system, I can totally get on board with the need for a more than two-party system. However, I feel like at this point we would have to tear it all down and rebuild to have more than a two-party system. I mean, it would have to be a start from scratch situation. I just don't think that that's going to happen.
I don't even think so. I think what's needed in that case is just to have two turns in the election. You have currently you vote once and that's it. You have to make your final choice in the first turn of the election. And so you can't think, well, I would really like someone like this to get more visibility, so I'm going to vote like this. And the second turn, when we only have two people left, then I'll make the important choice. I think if you change the system to have two turns, then you have smaller candidates that can voice their opinion and be heard in the first turn. And then the second turn, you get usually the two big parties anyway, but you hear the voices. And in your case, I think, Tony, you would have a Christian conservative candidate that could be presented, and that could have arguably, the Republican Party has moved over to more Christian values, but you would have someone that is actually, I don't think it's fair to say Trump represents Christian values, right?
Trump represents Christian policies, not Christian values.
Right. So I think you'd much rather have someone who represents your values and not just the policies.
Yes.
Right. And I mean, you could have, anyway, that's a whole other conversations, but just by virtue of having two turns, you would hear those multiple voices, and then you would still have the result of, usually you get the first two from the first turn to duke it out in the second turn, and then you usually get that, big battle between the two. But the first turn gives voice to alternatives, and that mellows people's opinions and policies, and that's what's needed to help people see a little bit more eye to eye, because maybe they're going to say, oh, well, I agree with this from this guy and that from that guy. And yes, unfortunately, I don't have the ideal person, but in the end, I'm going to go vote for that. The end result is almost the same mechanically, but on opinions, it changes things. So I don't think you would need to redo everything from scratch.
So we do have the primaries, and you do see different viewpoints in the primaries, as we've discussed multiple times. Right, I didn't support Trump in the primary. However, at least in the last few years, it seems like the primaries are won by the most extreme candidates, because that seems to be how it goes. The extreme candidates win the primaries because they do the extreme rhetoric to win the primary, and then in the general they tone it back to try to get the other side, the moderates, the undecideds.
And that's usually how it works. But the problem with the primaries is that there's still primaries within the two parties. So there's still this institutional line that they more or less have to toe. And the banner of the party is important as well in this case. So the primaries still happen. Even in France, we kind of had primaries recently to determine the leader of the parties, but you have like primaries, or you could have primaries for 5 different parties, and then you still have the 2-turn elections. So the two aren't exclusive. And,
did you know, Patrick, that California actually does things a little differently for their elections, and that the top 2 vote getters in the primaries are the ones that go to the general regardless of party? So there are some places in California that don't even see Republicans in the general election. This isn't for presidential election. This is for state elections.
Right. Yeah, I had heard about this. But again, I agree. But again, this is within the two parties. You still have a two-party system. And those 2-turn elections would shake that up. So, but of course, the two parties are in control, and they're never going to allow this, because it would give them, it would reduce their influence and their power. So, anyway, so that was our discussion on what happened last time. Let's still talk about the U.S. for a little bit. How are you viewing the elections? Or maybe you want to talk about something else. I don't know what's happening in the U.S. right now. I'm guessing elections, but.
Well, yeah, you brought it up. So I think my side, in case anyone wasn't aware, I am a Republican. I think the Republicans are actually going to end up doing pretty well and keep the Senate. I think it's looking pretty good for Republicans at the moment as far as the Senate goes. We might still lose the House. I don't think we're certainly not going to pick up any seats in the House, but I think the Senate is actually looking pretty good.
So what happens if you lose the House? I guess, is it a lame duck Congress? Is that how it's called? I think so. But I mean, so the House would be...
Well, that's usually associated with a president, but so the House, depending on the situation, of course, if there is another judicial nomination, the House isn't involved with that. It's the Senate and the president that takes care of that. But as far as legislation, it goes through the House first. So we would very likely see little in the way of conservative policies come out of the last 2 years of this presidential term.
How would you feel about this? I think my impression is that when it happened with the last turn of Obama, the House in the last 2 years blocked everything. I think because it was conservative, right? Am I mistaken there? I think
so. The last couple of years of Obama, we had both the House and the Senate, and and that was they certainly attempted to block everything. Now, I would like to see not just it's easy for me to say I'd like to see them work together more when it looks like the House is going to flip Democrat, but even I would. Unlike you, Patrick, I would like to see people come back to the middle. I think that there are places that we can meet and have the same ideas. The problem is we'll have a bill that's made that is 90% everyone's on board, but then the party in power throws in 10% of stuff that they know the other side isn't going to want and trying to push it through. And I just would rather see them separate those bills and provide them as different opportunities, not just one super bill.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's done like that. I'm guessing it's because they try to push the things they want to get when they have the majority. But
yes,
when they don't...
That's my take as well, yes.
Okay, so how are you seeing the next couple of years if the Democrats get the House? Is it like, okay, we got what we could during the first 2 years, and now whatever, everything's going to be blocked and it's business as usual because the political system is effed up? Or I don't know.
I think there's going to be some of that. At the beginning of Trump's term, I was worried that if the Democrats took over, especially the Senate and the House, that he would just flip to their side and start doing things their way. Now, I don't think there's any chance of that happening. Not so much because I think that he's just this stand-up conservative guy that's going to stick to his guns. I don't think the Democrats would be willing to work with him, even if he would come to their side on some issues. They've been so much hatred, and it's just gotten so ugly that there's no way that some of these high-ranking Democrats are going to go and say, okay, let's work with Trump because now we can push the things that we want. They spent the last 2 years, plus his pride is going to get into it. They spent the last 2 years talking about how evil he is. I just don't see it. If they'd have played it more moderate from the beginning, worked with him on some minor things, kind of buttered him up from time to time, I would be more worried now that he would go over and start pushing Democratic policies. And of course, when I say Democratic, we all know I mean the party, not democracy.
Right, of course.
But now,
just as when you say Republican, we know you mean the party and not the Republic institution.
Right. So I don't think that he will be crossing the line too much. I mean, I think he's willing, and he's shown his willingness to give, kind of some give and take, some bargaining there with the other side. But I don't think he's going to wholesale switch to their line of thinking, which was a concern of mine at first. I think the last 2 years is going to be campaigning for the next presidential election, honestly.
And you think he's going to run again?
I was just getting ready to say absolutely, Patrick. But, there is that chance that, and I thought this in the past too, that he's going to be like, I did it, I was president, now someone else's problem. But I think he's going to run again. The way he gets out there and campaigns and does his rallies, I think that he's probably going to run again, yes.
So let me ask you two questions, not because I want to be annoying, but because I genuinely wonder about this. You described the relationship the Democrats have with Trump and it being, full of hatred and extremes. I personally think Trump is, as a person, worse than Obama, but I feel like there was a lot of that kind of demonization and characterization. For me, it's more warranted, I'm choosing my words, more warranted for Trump than it was for Obama. I think Obama is more of a decent human than Trump. But what do you think? Because there was certainly a lot of, demonization of Obama and don't touch my Medicare money, Obama, you're the spawn of Satan and you weren't even born in the country. How do you feel, that parallel? Like the Democrats are demonizing Trump, or as you said, I can't remember what you said, but to that effect.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the lens of a conservative Republican guy, I think that the demonization of Trump is worse than the demonization of Obama. Now, that's not to say that it didn't exist. There was certainly demonization, since that's the word we're using, of Obama.
I'm sorry, I'm hearing some on the audience side, some tables being flipped right now. So keep going. It was just a bit distracting.
Well, I mean, I don't remember, and I honestly didn't pay as much attention. So I want to preface what I'm saying with that. For the first few years of Obama's term in office, I was younger and more interested in video games than anything else in the world. So, but I don't remember Obama being referred to as a Nazi.
But don't you think there's cause for those characterization of Trump? That's
no.
You don't think so?
No.
Okay.
No. And I think that anyone that would ever compare Donald Trump to Hitler is ridiculous. That's absolutely 100% ridiculous.
But comparing Donald Trump to Hitler, I think, is the kind of fringe ridiculousness that, yes, I agree. But maybe not saying he's a Nazi, but saying he enables Nazis, don't you think is a little bit more reasonable?
So Nazi, okay, so when I think of Nazis, so there is a distinction there.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's funny how discussing things and trying to put the right terms on things, we went from he is Hitler to maybe he is enabling some white supremacists. We're coming back to rational discussion that actually makes sense in the facts, just by virtue of discussing things.
And that's why I like talking to you. Because where I'm from, just a little bit of background, there's not a lot of people that disagree with me. It's just the nature of being where I am in the country. But I think there are two different aspects of the enabling white supremacy conversation. Is he purposefully enabling white supremacy? Is he going out there and the term dog whistling? I can't say that he's doing that. I can't say that he's not doing that, but I don't think he's blatantly, because I don't like the term dog whistling. If you can't tell for sure what it is without being on the inside, then maybe it's not a thing. But do the white supremacists? You can have your opinion. I can have my opinion.
Sure.
The white supremacists are certainly, I think from their point of view, they probably do feel that he's enabling them. Does that make sense? Like they see what he says and they see, he's on our side. I see what he says and I don't see him saying white power, white supremacy. That's not what I see out of him.
Yeah, no, I think it's more subtle than that, but fair enough. I'm asking for your opinion, so I won't, annoy you because you're giving it. But coming back to the thing with Obama, so you think he's being treated, maybe that's a better way of thinking about it. You think he's being treated more unfairly than Obama was? Or that's what I get from what you were saying.
You're saying a different thing than you said before. Now that's you're true. Saying he's being treated unfairly. And one question you did ask that I want to make sure that I answer is, do I feel that Obama he's still around, is a worse person than Trump? No, I don't. I feel that Trump is undoubtedly, as far as my morals, my ethics, my beliefs, Obama, has a wife, his kids. He's as far as I can tell, I've heard nothing to the contrary, been faithful to his wife. Trump has not. That's a big deal for me. So as a person, I feel that Obama is probably a better person than Trump. Yeah. But Obama's policies I didn't agree with, and I do agree with Trump's policies.
Yeah, that's a tough choice, though, because it's easy to look at it from here and say, oh, how can you, support that person who is betraying your moral stances? And certainly the question of, not to be too dramatic, but like selling your soul to someone to having something else. Like it feels like this would fit that description. But at the same time, those policies, he is on the side of the policies that you think are very important. I think I often refer to the question of being pro-life or pro-choice. And that is something that is very important to you. Like for you, it's literally a matter of life and death, right? And so saying, well, I'm a worse human being than others, but I will go in the direction that, according to you, will preserve life. You're like, for people, if you put the question on pro-life or pro-choice, then it becomes polarized. But if you say there's someone that is saving people from being shot in the head, and I don't like them as a person, but they're literally saving people from being shot in the head, like in the current world today now. And maybe that's also super oversimplifying it, but do you say, no, I don't want to vote for him because he cheated on his wife and he's a despicable person? But he's saying, I'm going to prevent shooting in the head of people. I don't know.
Right. One thing that you probably I'm going to make a point of is with my Christian beliefs, a lot of people, whether they're Christians or not, they put the emphasis on the love everybody, love your neighbor, love. Another part of
that's what Jesus was saying, but sure.
He was. But the other part of that was forgive. And, if someone asks for repentance or asks for forgiveness, you forgive them. So that is an aspect that we're, justifying, rationalizing with Trump. Is he says that he's changed his ways. Has he? I don't know. But I like to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'd like to give anybody the benefit of the doubt. If they say that they have changed and want forgiveness for what they've done that was wrong, God will do that. God will forgive them, and I'm supposed to forgive them as well. That's a part that a lot of people don't push on as much, because they just want the love part. They don't want the, well, maybe I did something wrong and need to ask for forgiveness, and then they're forgiven. So that's part of it as well.
I understand where you're coming from. It does feel incredibly convenient in the case of Trump, because it feels very convenient to believe that he's actually asking for forgiveness and to believe that he has changed his ways. He seems mentally unstable or very clever in the way he communicates. But anyway, that's my bias showing. But I mean, it seems even you agree that it's kind of convenient to, give him the benefit of the doubt here. But
I do. I do agree that it looks that way, and it is that way. And there are certainly, and I'm not saying that's, you hit the nail on the head on why I'm a supporter. It's the policies, not necessarily the person. And when you look back at other presidents we've had people that weren't the greatest people, and on both sides of the aisle. So, that's just how it is.
All right. I do want to ask you, I said I had two questions. I do want to mention the Roe versus Wade, which you did mention as well, because to me, the way I understand it, with very little understanding, is that, again, as you said, Kavanaugh is more likely to invalidate Roe versus Wade. For people who don't know, it's essentially a Supreme Court decision that means abortion is legal in the U.S., right? Depending on the state, but maybe not even depending on the state.
It doesn't depend on the state. It's federal.
Right. Federally, abortion is legal in the U.S. So you are a anti-abortion person. You think abortion, sorry to put it that bluntly, I don't think it's blunt, it's just the words, but you think abortion is equivalent to murder, correct?
Yes, and you can put it that bluntly all day long. That's exactly how I believe.
So you would hope that he would, well, you were saying he's a constitutionalist and he wouldn't invalidate Roe versus Wade, but that is what you would like the Supreme Court to do?
I would, yes. I don't think he's going to, and it's not necessarily because I think the Constitution favors Roe v. Wade. I think that he has not shown an inclination toward overturning Roe v. Wade. Sometimes he gets into and I forget the exact term, but precedent sets the law, whereas that's not really ever been the case. So, since Roe v. Wade is the current judgment, the current ruling, it's less likely to be overturned. Now, if it did get overturned at the federal level, all that would do was send it down to the state level. So the states that were for pro-choice could still have their, it would still be there. And the states that were more likely to be against it, it might go away. So it really, it changes it from an overarching, and I'm more of a local state government guy anyway. So it changes it from an overarching rule to the states decide. And that would be my preference either way.
So I don't want to get down a super long rabbit hole for this. So just touching on it, and if we spend too much time, I'll move on. But if it did get overturned, I'm genuinely curious again. Would you be in favor of contraception, or do you also think abstinence is the proper way of not having babies if you don't want them?
Well, I think that's probably the best way of not having babies if you don't want them.
Right.
It's the most sure way. Now, as far as contraception, I hear this a lot. Are we talking about all forms? Like, are we talking about condoms? Or are we talking about the pill? Are we talking about all of these?
I would say at the very minimum, the pill and condoms, mostly because the pill puts the choice in the hand of the woman, and the condom, you have to, in the moment, make sure that the guy agrees to do it, to put it on, which we know that many won't.
So I have no problem with the availability. I wouldn't outlaw contraception or anything like that. I do have an issue with requiring a company to provide certain forms of contraception if it's against their personal beliefs. And when I say certain forms, I don't know why anyone would have a problem with, and I'm not. I was raised Catholic, although I left the Catholic Church early enough that I didn't get into whether condoms were bad or not because I wasn't old enough. But condoms, I don't see why anyone would have a problem with that, although that's not typically something that's provided for by medical benefits. Now, me and my wife, she has opted not to use the pill because in her understanding of how it worked, it didn't seem to fit with what we believe. I don't know enough about it to really make an educated conversation about that. I will say the morning after pill I don't like. Again, though, I don't know that I would outlaw those things, or I wouldn't outlaw those things. But you said, would I be in favor of them? I'm in favor of contraception. If someone doesn't want to have kids, I feel like there's ways to not have kids.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair enough. I just wanted to have a clearer image of what someone like you, just basically you, would think about these things, because I think there's a lot of, ideas that people have about these debates, and that Roe v. Wade or pro-choice, pro-life can go to different lengths. And so anyway, I'm grateful that you would answer that question.
Sure. Can I add
sure.
one more thing, Patrick? So I think the Republican monster misconception is, and this is not how I am, is that we're going to push what we want on everyone else. And there are certain things that I would absolutely, if I could, push on everyone else. And like we've talked about, pro-life is one of those things. However, contraception, I told you about our situation in our house, our family. I'm not pushing that on other people. That's our choice. Other people have their own choice, and they can make that. Because in the form of contraception, and this is why we have our feelings on the pill, it's preventing, not terminating.
Of course. Yeah.
So I'm completely okay with preventing. I think there are certain verses in the Bible that people use that we probably don't want to get into about preventing, that I think are completely taken out of context. But so I try not to push. I will tell you what I think all day long, but I try not to get up on the mountaintop and scream at people.
And I think ultimately, that is what democracy is. I mean, yes, some people should get up on mountaintops and convince others, because we need that in politics. But what I'm referring to is the fact that you believe something and you'll vote for it. And that's how democracy works. And the as long as it fits the Constitution, and we have systems to make sure that the decisions of lawmakers that were elected do fit the Constitution, then the majority opinion is implemented, and that is a pretty good system. The key is that everyone should try and actually cast their vote. And yeah, anyway, that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, I think this is incredibly healthy of a conversation to have, because you're probably one of the most right people that I know, and having rational conversations like these are a balm for the soul. It's what the show is built on. I was talking about last time on the last general show about the fact that I wasn't sure what good we were doing, and a few people were very kindly answered, remember what your original mission statement is. Your mission statement isn't to solve all the problems in the world, as I jokingly put it in the last episode. It's to just give an outlet for people to listen to other people's opinion without all the craziness that is pervasive in the world, not just in the US, but in the world really right now. And I think on that point, we mostly manage. So, and I do think it's important. So thank you very much for the support that you expressed following the last episode, everyone, and thank you, Tony, for agreeing to come and share your opinions and your ideas on the show.
Hey, let me give you some props real quick, Patrick. I was driving down the road.
You have all the time in the world. Take as long as you want.
I was driving down the road yesterday, thinking about, okay, what am I going to talk about? What are my thoughts, and just kind of going over things in my head. And one of the things that you have, being on the show and talking to you and talking to the people on the show, has put in my mind was about healthcare. And I don't necessarily know the answer on how to accomplish it, but I've come more. I don't want to say I've gone more left, because that's a scary thought, but I tend to be more like, we need to provide an outlet for people to get the care that they need. Again, I don't know how, because the system is currently not set up for that. So it would take a revamp of the system and an overhaul. Maybe an overhaul is strong, but there would need to be changes, and that's above my pay grade. But just talking to you has influenced my.
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit.
My thought process. Are you with me? You got me?
You said talking to you has influenced my thought process.
Sure. Definitely still right-leaning, of course. I'm a conservative. I'm a Republican. I'm a Christian, a white dude. Those things certainly aren't going to change, especially one of them, or two of them. But,
well,
it has influenced me.
Yeah. Sorry, okay. Keep going.
But I'm more accepting of the views, and I take views that have merit, and I take those to heart, and I think about them. So that is definitely something, and I think that honestly I've had that personality type anyway. I don't just cast out somebody's thoughts because they don't agree with me, but this show has helped me hone that, and it's been a really good experience for me as well.
That warms my heart. And I think it's important also to understand that no one convinces anyone in a tweet. And I use the word tweet as, because it's topical, but you're not going to convince someone in a conversation. Things change very slowly, and the reason the political system is slow is because you don't want to make drastic changes. And it's the same in conversations and ideas. Any idea you've had that you weren't quote unquote born with, meaning inherited from your parents and social context and all of this, probably took a while. First, you're confronted with the idea, and they seem a bit strange or a bit incongruous, and you think about it more, and over weeks, months, years, you understand why maybe it would make sense. And it's happened to me many times, and I'm glad it seems like it's happening to you as well, and I'm sure it happens to many people. But the key is you have to be able to have a dispassionate conversation about things in order for that process to happen and for the better solution to emerge. If you're just yelling at each other, yeah, anyway, the point is, here we're trying not to yell. And thank you very much for that, for those few words, Tony. It really means a lot to me. And I'm going to move on because I don't want to get into emotional territory. And let's talk about what's been happening in France as well. We're not going to do a full episode on the US, although we could have stopped here and it would have been. But there was one thing really interesting happening in France in the past few weeks. There were many things, actually. I could talk about many different things. The government was reworked. We have the government is in an interesting position, I'm going to say right now. But even more than this, there's... How do I even approach this thing? Last election in 2017, we had a very split voter base. As we mentioned many times, the multi-party system doesn't just have benefits. It can also become kind of messy. And in the last election, we had maybe 5 different parties that were roughly in a similar position, voting-wise. So we had maybe 4 parties that were around 20% of the vote in the first turn. One of those parties was France Insoumise, which means how do you even translate Insoumise? Unsubmitted, like they don't submit to the order of the world. And they are left-wing party. I've been describing them as far-right, which in French translate to extrême gauche. I'm sorry, did I say right? I meant far-left. And far translates into extreme in French, which some people take issue with, but I think in English the words fit. And they are anti-capitalist, and they are semi-anti-Europe, and they have a leader who has been somewhat controversial. He's a very clever person. He's got some interesting ideas, and even the party does defend some ideas I mostly disagree with, but some of them are worth taking a look at, always on the left side of the spectrum. And the key fact of that party and that strength was its leader. It's Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is very vocal, very charismatic, and who had been until now on the verge of, how do I even describe this? On the verge of a leader you can criticize for its over-dimensioned ego. And I'm not drawing any comparisons here, but he was showing signs of being a little bit full of himself and thinking that it was unjust that he didn't win the election. He waited many hours, maybe even a day, until admitting that he was in the place he was for the second turn, meaning he wasn't selected for the second turn. He was maybe 1% under or 2% under the person who arrived in second place, who was the far right candidate, Marine Le Pen. And he was showing signs of being, I don't want to say unstable, that's not the case, but being like this bombastic leader that could veer into unsettling territory very easily. And what happened last week was that there was an inquiry by the police and the judges into campaign financing for his party, along with other parties as well. I think other parties didn't reach into the territory that it did for his party, which was a police raid into the house, the apartment of the party leader, and the offices of the party. So it might have happened for other parties, but for his, it definitely did. And when it happened last week, he kind of lost it. He started with a live Facebook stream as the raid was happening in his apartment to kind of, which is fair enough in this day and age. You want to, especially if you're in the opposition, you want to show how you're being treated. And he was showing all of it and calling a kind of a rally for his forces, saying, "Oh, look at this! Like this is." This shouldn't happen. The standard rhetoric you would expect from something like this. And then he went to the offices of his party, and they were being raided as well. And at that point, he really lost it. He started saying things like, my person is sacred. And maybe that was in his house already. Like, my person is sacred. I am the Republic. And don't touch me. And he started shoving police officers to the side, trying to enter the offices. And they ended up, him and his party members, his second in command and others, pushing into the offices that were being raided, obviously against the the indications, the instructions of the police, getting into it and kind of disrupting the police raid that was happening to gather evidence about what had been happening in the party, in the financing for the campaign. And he there was a brawl that ensued. He like shoved aside a judge that he later said, "Oh, I didn't know he was a judge. I thought he was a cop," as if it would matter that he would shove around a cop and not a judge. And again, these two phrases have become kind of a cause of deriding and concern. He was yelling like, "I am the Republic. Don't touch me. My person is sacred." And obviously, everyone understands that. Oh, maybe I didn't mention he is a representative. He is in the House, so that's why he was saying these things. Sorry, that's a key important element of his story. But he's a representative. He's a député in the House, and so everyone understands that an elected official represents the Republic, and that he should not be, he has some privileges as it relates to the law, because you have a separation of power, of the police, because you have separation of power, obviously. But that's not what he meant, how people understood it. And I don't think that's what he meant. I think it was an outburst of his, you could say, megalomaniac personality, that he couldn't accept the fact that he was being investigated. And of course he said, the cops are he was already claiming that the press is at the call of the great capital forces of the world that are ruling the world, which arguably, if you have an anti-capitalistic view of the world, yes, there are forces that are maybe too strong in the world, but claiming that France has no independent press is a very different story, and one that doesn't hold up at all. Like, we have a strong free press that has investigated essentially every party and put out scandals about every party there is. So that claim doesn't hold up. But now he was saying, the police is at the beck and call of the great capital, and the judges are at the beck and call of the great capital, and this is a political maneuvering by the current government, and like all of these populist conspirationist ideas that in many countries are happening right now. Like these kinds of crazy outbursts are happening in many countries. And the thing that really heartens me is that it didn't take in France. Most of the reactions I've seen have been negative. Now, of course, his base is going to be energized by this. His base is going to believe him and probably support him. But there's a whole second circle of people who were who didn't have a candidate they could believe in at the election in 2017, who voted for him because they thought he might be a little bit extreme, but he was still the best representation of their ideas in that election. But those people, everything I've seen was, all right, he's nuts. We won't touch him with a stick. And he's been dropping in the polls and all of this. So it was a kind of a crazy moment. And he kind of, for many people, I didn't like him from the start, but I didn't think he was that bad. But it was kind of like revealing his personality to the world. And the takeaway from this, if we look a little bit farther in the future, our next election is in 2020. So we still, 2022, sorry. So we still have a lot of time. But the concern is, if he is not the beacon of hope for the left, and on the right, we have the equivalent of the Republican Party, the what used to be the standard right-wing party, meaning conservative, but not in a extreme way, is going farther and farther to the right in a concerning way, to the point that I think many people on the right will not want to vote for their representant at the next election. And on the right of that, we have the far-right party, the Front National, which actually had to split and change and all of this, so Le Pen, which is far-right. And we have this far-left. And we have in the center, center-right maybe, Macron, which is the current government, that many people don't like. It becomes kind of a who can you vote for situation, which is a recipe for disaster for the next election. But I do think that Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the one who had that outburst, kind of destroyed his chances for ever being president, because unless something incredible happens in the next 4 years, these outbursts are going to be played over and over again on TV whenever he decides to go for the presidentship again. And that was kind of a insane. I'm sure it seems remote, very remote from you, Tony, and you don't really hear about it. But for us, it was like this moment of everyone looking at this and thinking, okay, he's insane. What do we do now? But I do, as I said, I do take heart in the fact that most people looked at this and didn't buy into the outburst and the rhetoric. So that was kind of a moment when I thought, okay, France is maybe still has its head on its shoulders. So yeah, I don't know why, but we don't fall for it, or at least it seems. Maybe things will explode in the next election in 2022. And that was the story from France. And I think that is going to be it for this episode. I want to thank you again, Tony, for being on the show. I think these episodes where we explore the other sides are, as I said, very useful. So thanks so much for agreeing to be back over and over again, in spite of my incessant questioning and annoying you. And do you still use your Twitter? Do you have somewhere you can direct people if they want to get a hold of you?
Sure. I do still use Twitter. I'm more of a watcher than a publisher, but you can find me at Tony Staley, and I'm sure Patrick will put that in the show notes. So happy to talk to anyone that agrees or disagrees with me, as long as they don't yell at me and make me cry.
Don't make Tony cry, people. That's not nice. Well, hopefully the people who listen to this show and who listen long enough that they have reached the end of this episode will be the kind of people you want to have discussions with. For me, it's Not Patrick on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. I post many things, including photos of the wonderful surroundings of where I'm living now, in the heart of the Finnish countryside. It is truly dreamlike. It's a paradise here. I would never have thought that paradise was actually in the south of Finland. Tony, actually, if you're looking for it, it's not up in the sky. It's right here, so you can show up anytime. It's very, very convenient. And the show is available at FrenchSpin.com. You can go on the site and comment and let us know what you think about what we said. You can, of course, also find Pixels, which is a show about video games, and you know that this period is the big period for gaming. So if you want to hear about Red Dead Redemption 2, we'll have an episode about that very soon up on the site, but also other games, of course, and in the podcast. I say on the site, in the podcast. So that's Pixels. You can subscribe to it right now. And finally, of course, this show is supported by patrons, by Patreon. If you want to support it, you can go to patreon.com/the Phileas Club and just, give a couple of bucks an episode. It is invaluable. Well, it does have a quantifiable value, but it is invaluable in the way that it does help me do the show. It supports it helps me produce it and buy food for my family, which is of course appreciated. But if you think the show has some value to you, if it brings you something you don't get somewhere else, which I think it might for some people, please do consider subscribing at patreon.com/the Phileas Club. We will be back for another episode very soon. Until then, listen to people who talk when they're not yelling, of course. Thank you very much. Talk to you then.